In today's video, I'm going to show you 10 types of passing chords that are really going to spice up your chord progressions. It's going to start simple and it's going to get more advanced as we go through the video. So let's get started. The first type of passing chord is the diatonic passing chord. This one is super simple. All we've got to do is play the previous chord or the next chord in our key before we play our target chord. Our target chord is the chord we're headed to. So if we're in the key of C, here are all the chords in the key of C, and we wanted to play an F chord. Before we play the F chord, we could play either a G or we could play an E minor. So let's apply this to a chord progression. We're going to use a 1, 6, 4, 5 in the key of C, so that's C, A minor, F and G, and we're going to apply this diatonic passing chord to every chord. Between C and A minor, we've got the option of either playing a G or a B diminished, because those two are either side of the A minor. I am going to choose the B diminished chord. The next chord in the chord progression is F. So between the A minor and F, we could either play a G or we could play an E minor, as we said earlier. I'm going to choose the E minor leading into the F. The next chord in the chord progression is G. So before G, we could either play an A minor or we could play an F. We were just on F, so we may as well play an A minor before we go to the G. Finally, we're going back to C to finish things off. We could either play a D minor or a B diminished beforehand. We've already played a B diminished as a passing chord, so let's use a D minor as a passing chord. Now, a really important thing to note with your passing chords is that they are not the main chords in your chord progressions. They're just there to get you to another chord. So you want to get on them and get off them pretty quickly. They're just there to spice things up a little bit. So let's take a listen to how that sounds. Now, that is a very simple type of passing chord, but you don't want to discount it, as you never know when it might come in handy. So let's move on to the next type of passing chord, and the next type of passing chord is the slash chord passing. The slash chord passing is very, very similar to the diatonic chord passing, except we're using slash chords. So what are slash chords? They're simply a chord that doesn't have the root note in the bass. So if I was to play a C chord and I put an F below everything else, I'd have a C/F. The C is the chord, the F is the note in the bass. So how do we use slash chords as passing chords? Let's say we're playing C to A minor. What we're going to do is we're going to play the C. The passing chord is going to be a C again, but with a different note in the bass. That note in the bass has to be a note higher or a note lower than the root note of the next chord. So we could either play a C with a B in the bass, or we could play a C with a G in the bass. So let's apply slash chords to that same 1, 6, 4, 5 chord progression and try and hear the difference that it makes. Between C and A minor, I'm going to play a C/B. Then between A minor and F, I could either play an A minor with a G in the bass, or I could play an A minor with an E in the bass. I'm going to play an A minor with a G in the bass. Then we're playing F to G, so I could play an F with F in the bass. That's what we were just doing, so that's probably not going to work. Or we could play an F with an A in the bass. That's going to work. So we're going to play an F with an A in the bass, leading into G. And then G to C, what we could do is play a G with either a D or a B in the bass. I'm going to play a G with a D in the bass. So let's take a listen to how that sounds. So as you can hear, it's a bit similar to the diatonic passing chord, but it's a bit more subtle. That's perfect if you want to create a bit of movement in your chord progressions, but you don't want it to be as obvious as the diatonic passing chord. The next type of passing chord is the line cliche passing. These are really, really awesome. We're going to take one note in our chord that we're playing and ascend it or descend it chromatically. So for example, we could use a C chord, and let's choose the fifth of the C chord. That fifth is G. We could raise it to a G sharp, then an A, then a B flat, and what we'd get is a C, then a C augmented, then a C6, then a C7, and then that C7 would lead us nicely into another chord, probably F. Or if we were playing a C and our target chord was A minor, maybe we could descend that root note, the C, down to B flat, and then down to A where we play our A minor. So that's the line cliche. Let's take a look at our next type of passing chord. This is where things start getting a bit more exciting. It's the augmented chord. So first of all, here are a few augmented chord shapes that you might find useful. Now let's take a look at the augmented chord formula. The augmented chord passing applies to chord 1 and 5 in your key. So what we're going to do is we're going to either play chord 1, which is C, if we're playing in the key of C, or chord 5, which is G, turn that into an augmented chord after playing it as a major chord. And from there, we could go to either chord 1, 4, or 6. So for example, we could play a C, we could turn that C into a C augmented chord, and then that C augmented chord would lead us to C, F, or A minor. Alternatively, we could play a G, then play a G augmented chord, then that G augmented chord would lead us to C, F, or A minor too. So let's try this in a chord progression. We're going to start with C, turn that C into an augmented chord. We're going to go to chord 4, which is F. From F, we can go to chord 5, which is G, and then that G we can turn into a G augmented chord, and from that G augmented chord, we can lead to chord 1, 4, or 6 again. We're going to go to chord 6, which is A minor. So our chord progression is C, C augmented, F, G, G augmented, A minor. Let's take a listen to that. The next type of passing chord is the diminished chord passing. I really love this one. This is probably my favorite out of all of them, and it's really simple to execute. So first of all, here are some diminished chord shapes that you might enjoy using. We can use diminished or diminished seventh chords for the diminished passing. So to play a diminished passing, all we do is play a diminished or a diminished seventh chord 1 fret below or 2 frets above our target chord. Let's say we were going to a D chord. 1 fret below D is C sharp, so we could play a C sharp diminished chord before the D, and 2 frets above D is E, so we could play an E diminished chord before D as well. It's as simple as that. So let's apply this to a chord progression. Let's use a 4, 5, 6 in the key of C. So that's F, G, and A minor. So between F and G, we're going to play our passing chord. So leading into G, we could either play an F sharp diminished or an A diminished, as they're 1 fret below and 2 frets above. I'm going to choose an F sharp diminished. Then from G to A minor, we could either play a G sharp diminished or a B diminished, because they're 1 fret below and 2 frets above the A. I'm going to choose a B diminished. I'm going to turn it to a B diminished seventh chord, just to spice things up a little bit more, and that leads us nicely into the A minor. So let's take a listen to the chord progression. The next type of passing chord is the chromatic mediant passing chord. So let's break down the two words chromatic and mediant. So chromatic means not in the key, and mediant means third, or the third degree of our scale. Now, an important term to note is submediant as well, is a third below our tonic. The mediant and submediant in the key of C are E minor and A minor. So when we put the terms together, chromatic mediant is where we take the mediant and change one of the notes in the chord to make it chromatic. Now, there are loads of different options, but you can try and experiment for yourself. Now, chromatic mediants lead into chords that are a semitone above or semitone below them very nicely. So for example, we could take the third in our key of C, which is E minor, turn that into a major chord by raising the third, so we're playing an E major, and that leads us very nicely into the chord a semitone above, which is F. So now a C to F sounds a lot nicer because we've just put that passing chord in between. Now we could use the A minor chord as well, and we could turn that into an A flat major. That A flat major leads us very nicely into G because it's just a fret above G. So let's try putting all of these together into a chord progression. So I'm going to use some seventh chords. So I'm going to play C major 7. Then I'm going to use that E chromatic mediant to lead us into F major 7. Then from F major 7, I'm going to play the A flat major, which leads us very nicely into G7. And then that G7 resolves nicely back on the C again. So let's take a listen to that. The next type of passing chord is the secondary dominant passing. This is a really awesome one. So to know how secondary dominant chords work, we need to know how dominant chords work in the first place. So chord 5 in the key of C is G7. That G7 creates a lot of tension. It leads us back to C again. It's chord 5 in our key, and it leads us back to chord 1. I call this a 5-to-1 resolution. But we can take advantage of the dominant 7th chord function of creating tension and create 5-to-1 resolutions in other places. So all we do is we play a dominant 7th chord, a 5th above our target chord in our chord progression. Now there are two ways to figure out what the 5th is, of whatever chord you're playing. Whatever the root note is, say our root note is C. The fifth is going to be a power chord shape, so 2 frets higher and the next string down, so that's the 5th fret of the G string, or it's going to be the same fret on the string below, so the 3rd fret of the low E string. So let's say the next chord in our chord progression was A minor. So what we would do is find the 5th of A, which is E, and play that as a dominant 7th chord. We would play E7, and that leads us very nicely into our A minor chord. Now it works going into major chords, or it works going into minor chords as well, it doesn't matter. Let's try it with an entire chord progression. So we'll stick with that, the C to A minor with the E7 as our secondary dominant. Then the next chord in our chord progression is going to be F. So we find a 5th above F, which is C, and we turn the C into a C dominant 7th chord. We play C dominant 7, which leads us very nicely into F. Then the next chord in our chord progression is G. So we have to find the 5th of G, which is D. We play that as a dominant 7th chord, D7, which leads us very nicely back into that G. And then from G, we can play G7 because that's the 5th of C, and that leads us nicely back into C. So altogether, we've got C, E7, A minor, C7, F, D7, G, G7, C. Let's take a listen to how that sounds. Now I've used secondary dominants between every single chord, but it's important to note that you don't have to do it between every single chord. You could just use it for one chord in your chord progression. And sometimes that's better actually, because you don't want to overwhelm the listener with passing chords all over the place. In some cases, less is more. So let's take a look at the next passing chord, and it's the 2-5 passing. The 2-5 passing is very, very similar to the secondary dominant passing. In fact, it's the same. We're just adding another chord before the secondary dominant. So I want to introduce you to the concept of tonicization. This is where we temporarily change key in our chord progression. We are temporarily going to be changing key to the target chord. Now this is a 2-5 passing. The 5 is our secondary dominant. The 2 is going to be coming before that 5, that secondary dominant. The 2, if we're leading into a major chord, is going to be a minor chord. And the 2 is going to be a minor 7 flat 5 chord if we're leading into a minor chord, if the target chord is a minor chord. So how do we find the 2 in the 2-5 passing? The 2 chord is simply 2 frets higher than the target chord. Super, super simple. And as I've already said, the 5 is the secondary dominant. So for example, if we were going to A minor, the 2 is 2 frets higher, that is B. And as I said, if we're going to a minor chord, we play a minor 7 flat 5 chord here. So we play a B minor 7 flat 5, then we play the 5 chord, which we established already is the E7, and then that leads us into A minor. We've temporarily changed keys to A minor just before landing on the A minor. The whole chord progression is in the key of C, but there are temporary key changes just to help us lead into these chords in a more sophisticated way. Let's keep doing this to the rest of that 1-6-4-5 chord progression. So the next chord is F, the 2 going into F is going to be G. We play a G minor chord because we're going to a major chord. 5 is C, as we established earlier. So we're playing G minor, C, F. Then the next chord is G in our chord progression. Leading into G, this is a major chord. The 2 is A. The chord quality is minor because we're going into a major chord. So we're playing A minor, D7 because D is the 5, and then G. And then the final chord of our chord progression is us returning back to C. So we could play a D minor, then a G7, leading us back to the C. So let's take a listen to that all together. The penultimate passing chord is the tritone substitution. This sounds complex, and there's a lot of theory behind it. I'm not going to go into the theory. You can check out a video I made on tritone substitutions if you want to go deep into the theory, but it's such a simple passing chord to execute. All we've got to do is play a dominant 7th chord, 1 fret above our target chord. It's as simple as that. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the secondary dominant chord progression we came up with earlier in the video, and we're just going to replace all of the secondary dominants with the tritone substitution. C, leading into A minor, we're going to play a dominant 7th chord, a fret above A minor, that's B flat. So we're playing a B flat 7 leading into A minor. Leading into F, we're going to play an F sharp 7. Leading into G, we're going to play an A flat 7. And then leading back to C, we're going to play a D flat 7. all of those dominant 7th chords are a fret above the target chord. It's really, really, really simple, and it sounds really awesome, so take a listen. Now, our final type of passing chord is a good one. This is the backdoor dominant passing. It's the backdoor dominant, so it's another type of dominant 7th chord that we can use. And we use it whenever we're going to a major chord. It can definitely work going into minor chords, but I feel like it's more effective going into major chords. So we're gonna play a dominant 7th chord 2 frets below whatever the target chord is. So if we're heading to C, we'd want to play a B flat 7 before we go to C. So if we take a 1-4-5 chord progression, C major 7, F major 7, G7, C, and apply backdoor dominance to the C major 7 and the F major 7, before the F major 7 we can play E flat 7, and before the C major 7 we can play B flat 7. So we've got C, E flat 7, F, G7, B flat 7, and then C again. But we do not have to stop there when it comes to backdoor dominance. We can go even further. Now, our backdoor dominant, for example, if we're going to C, is B flat 7. This is not in the key of C, is it? This is the 5 chord in another key. The B flat 7 is the 5 chord in the key of E flat. Now, as I previously mentioned in the video, the 2 chord loves to come before the 5 chord, doesn't it? So what's the 2 chord in the key of E flat? It's F minor. So before that B flat 7, we could play an F minor, giving us F minor, B flat 7, and then C. Amazing. We could do it leading into F as well. So our backdoor dominant is E flat leading into F, okay, E flat 7. E flat 7 is the 5 chord in the key of A flat. So what is the 2 chord? The 2 chord is B flat minor. So we can play B flat minor, E flat 7, leading us into F major. Here's a quick tip for you. That 2 chord sounds really, really gorgeous if you play it as a minor 9 chord. So that's exactly what I'm gonna do in this chord progression. I'm playing C major, then I'm playing the 2-5 backdoor dominant leading into F major. So I'm playing B flat minor 9, E flat 7, leading into F major. I'm gonna play an F major 7 here just to jazz things up a little bit. Then I'm gonna go to our 5 chord, which is G7, and then we're going back to C major 7, where I'm gonna play the backdoor dominant chord progression, which is F minor and B flat 7. The F minor I'm gonna turn into an F minor 9 again. So F minor 9, B flat 7, and that leads us back into our C chord. So let's take a listen to how that chord progression sounds. Now you want to remember that passing chords are to be used once you already have a solid chord progression. You can't polish a turd here, but you can make a good progression great with passing chords. Now, if you're constantly making turds and you want to make awesome chord progressions instead, you can check out the first 2 chapters of my book, Chord Charisma, for free. The link is down in the description for you. Chord Charisma is absolutely going to change the game for you when it comes to chords and chord progressions. I go over everything that has been covered in today's video, but in a lot more detail. Plus, there's tons more content on creating chord progressions, stuff that will absolutely blow your mind. So here's a little bit more about the book. Chord Charisma 2.0 is a complete guide to writing incredible, jaw-dropping chord progressions. Everything you need to know about harmony and chords is contained within this book. It will take you through the basics of building tension and releasing your chord progressions, and will build upon this foundation with more advanced concepts like jazzy extended chords, borrowed chords from other keys, and cool substitutions to take your chord progression knowledge and ability to the next level. There is a serious amount of content in this book, but it's laid out in a structured fashion with action steps at the end of each chapter to make sure you've fully internalized and are actually able to use what you've learned from the book in your playing. That's really, really important. It's a very practical book, which will get you writing new progressions straight away, guaranteed. You'll also have access to personal feedback on your progressions from me via the Chord Charisma Facebook community. And as a bonus, I've thrown in a soloing guide to go with the book, so you won't get lost when you're trying to play licks over your new and improved chord progressions. Head to the link in the description to grab your copy of Chord Charisma 2.0 today.